It is such an honor today to have Dr. Cleopatra. As you heard from her bio, she is a scientist, a professor, a fertility strategist, a mother of three, and just a ray of sunshine. Thank you, Dr. Cleopatra, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. So good to be here with you, Angela. And thank you for this incredible podcast that you've created.
And I remember when I told you about this podcast early on, and I saw you and I said, you are the power of the only.
Yes, you did.
Yes, let's dive deep into it. You know, we know all your accolades and all the research and the amazing things that you're doing in the world. But, you know, recently, this is a big deal. You were the first woman of color in the history to be hired to be on the tenure track of your department where you started, right? Is that correct?
That's so true. So I recently got tenure and at USC, and I was the first woman of color to be in history to be hired on the tenure track in the department where I started at USC. And it feels amazing to finally have tenure. For those of you who are familiar with the tenure process, it's a long road. It's kind of, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's kind of like making partner at a law firm, but perhaps even a little bit more exclusive than that, because I assume if you don't make a partner at one law firm, you can just go to another one. Whereas if you don't get tenure at your university, it's hard to go to another similar caliber university.
And let's just talk about, to give perspective for that, you know, as in the history, right? So that's some challenges that you face. How do you feel like the power of the only came up for you then, just reaching that milestone?
Oh God, Angela, where to begin? First of all, from where I started my life, the likelihood that I would get a PhD, do a postdoctoral fellowship, get hired on the tenure track, become a professor, become a tenured professor, the odds were slim to none. And I think it's just really incredible. And I have to say that I was really put through a pretty brutal hazing process as a woman, and a woman of color, and a young woman, and a woman having children, and not just having one child, but actually having 3 children within the span of 5 years on the tenure track. That's pretty much unheard of. And the spoken and unspoken message in academia, and I think in a lot of places, professional spaces, is that women who have children, and especially women who have a lot of children, are not serious about their careers. Or in my case, I'm not a serious scientist. That was the thing that people like to say about me, because I was having one baby after another, because I had a vision for my life. And it wasn't just being an incredible scientist and making these breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs and innovations that allowed other people to have children, but also to have the family of my dreams too. And even as an older mom, I had my babies right before my 35th, 37th, and 40th birthdays. And so I really went through a lot. And to be honest with you, I thought often that it's easy for people to underestimate me, because what they don't have any awareness about, coming from the positions of privilege that they come from, is how strong I had to be and how hard I had to work in order to be there in the first place with them.
And it's amazing. And I love your story. And let's dive deeper into your story. Like I said, when you walk into a room, you are like a ray of sunshine. But sometimes that sunshine that you bring to others and to your work, you know, in reproductive health and fertility, it's going to change the world and how things are done. But let's dive a little deeper. I mean, there's a reason that you were put here, right? There's a reason. And talk about, you know, I know sometimes the happiness comes, the reason you live such a fulfilled, happy life is because there was a journey that you went on. Why did you go on this mission with reproductive health?
Yeah, it was just the mission that I was clearly born into. I lost my mother at birth. My beautiful young mother was 27 years old, and my parents had just recently come to the United States, and my parents didn't have health insurance and we were very poor, and my mother didn't speak English,
Mhm.
and my mother died in childbirth, and it was completely preventable, and she died because her life wasn't valued and because poor decisions were made on her behalf for her medical care. And so it really was the case that at birth, this mission was handed to me. And
Mhm.
somehow, even as a really young girl, I had the understanding and awareness that this was what I was meant to do. This was what I was meant to pay attention to. This was what I was meant to work for and toward, for the world to be a healthier and happier and more loving and supportive place for women and their children. And I followed my instincts. So long before I went into the research laboratory and had the formal training and education that allowed me to develop what is now called the Primester Protocol,
Mhm.
where we help people before they get pregnant to ignite their fertility, reverse reproductive aging, overcome fertility challenges, and ensure that they can get pregnant quickly and easily and have epigenetically the healthiest, happiest, brightest, most well-adjusted baby they can possibly have, what we call their super baby. Long before I was formally developing that, I was just trusting my instincts. I was watching what's different about the women who seem to just flow really easily through pregnancy and birth and parenting. What about everybody else? What did they need? What can we do to help them? What's that critical period where if we could catch them and we could help them, we could make everything else that would come after it better? And that's how the Primester developed.
And I love your work. When did that shift for you? Like you said, you knew early on that you were kind of called to this, but when did it really, you say, this is what I'm going to devote my life to?
Yes. I think I was devoting my life to this very early, but without even realizing it.
Yeah.
And then when I went a month after my 18th birthday, I started college at the University of Miami, and I went straight into a lab studying pregnancy. And it was from that moment on that I started developing the Primester protocol. At that time, we called it In Bloom. For a long time, we called it In Bloom. And the work, of course, has evolved. It's become more precise, more refined, to the point that it is such a powerful system that people can use at home today, that within 12 months 97% of our couples and women are pregnant. And so it's so effective today, and that really is the results of now 24 years of developing, testing, refining, and just getting so good at what we do at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute, living it.
So amazing. And I want to pull back into a bigger picture for people. And so you're a fertility specialist, so you help people with the Primester, right? To help them really change. There's some research that you've done based on all this research you've done as a professor and in the lab about how can we change women's bodies and before, right? That affects generations to come. So that's
Yeah.
one level about, empowering the individual, right? Empowering the individual to create health and reproductive health for themselves and their families. And then there's the other added piece of really you're changing the way institutionally, right? Can you talk about what is that called? The
Health,
stereotype threat?
healthcare
Yeah.
stereotype threat.
Yeah, because
Yes.
institutionally, and I just want people to get this big picture, right? Because you're a professor, great. You teach students, you're impacting all these lives. Then you're teaching the individual, the woman, to take care of themselves, affecting generations of reproductive health, but in a bigger scope. You were talking about how you lost your mother in a
Mhm.
situation where it could have been prevented. So now, thinking more globally on how we change that, and with recent events, we can see that we can do all the things that we need to do, and we still need to keep doing that, but systems also need to shift. So talk a little bit about that.
100%. And
Yeah.
I have goosebumps just hearing you summarize that, because it's true. And that was really the plan, right? You have this multi-level approach to
Hmm.
contributing to the health and well-being of women and their children. That's what we do at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute. So what's important for us to know is that we all have implicit biases And so many people are so uncomfortable to engage in conversations surrounding race and discrimination and socioeconomic status and other aspects of identity. And what I want people to know is that they don't have to be afraid to be perceived as racist or to be perceived as biased, because guess what? We all are. And the reason we all are, this isn't my opinion, this is based on what we know from neuroscience and other social and behavioral sciences. The reason we're all biased is because that's the way that our brains work. Our brains use something called schema. These are mental shortcuts, and we use them, the brain uses them in order to be able to take in the huge amounts of information that are constantly swirling around us and
Yes.
make very rapid decisions to ensure our safety and our survival. That is always going to be the top priority for our brain. And so one of the schema that we're most prone to using as human beings is to be prejudiced. Because in the time of our ancestors, when we all lived far apart and we lived with small groups of people, when we saw a dissimilar other, it usually signaled danger. It might signal the likelihood of war. It might signal the likelihood of exposure to diseases that we don't yet have immunity for, like what we're seeing with coronavirus today. It's wiping out segments of the world's population because we haven't seen this virus before, and so we don't have immunity to it. Not yet, anyway. We're building immunity to it as we speak. And so the brain processes a dissimilar other, someone who looks different from us, someone who's from a different racial or ethnic or national background than we are, as signaling danger. And so we are all prejudiced. And I think if we can start with that foundational
Yes.
piece of knowledge, that common ground, then we can stand up and speak up from there without being so afraid of being perceived as being prejudiced, being racist, being biased in some way. If we can all just say, I for sure am biased, because every human being is, even people with marginalized identities are, and you don't have to take my word for it. There's actually a test that you can take through Harvard University. It's online. It's called the Implicit Attitudes Test. If you just Google Harvard University Implicit Project, you will find this test that you can take online. You can take it in relation to various identities, for example, race, gender, sexual orientation, I believe, gender identity, etc. And you can see for yourself how biased you are and in what direction you are biased. And you will see that all of us have some degree of bias. And so you can take this for yourself and see. So what the healthcare stereotype threat does at the institutional level is to say that the institutions that are associated with our health and well-being and advancement in our society, like the medical system, the healthcare system, like the educational system, have these biases embedded in them because they are the aggregate of our individual biases and our social and cultural biases. And so we teach healthcare providers how to, first of all, recognize that as a human being, they have these implicit biases just like we all do. So there's no shame in admitting it. There's no shame in acknowledging it. And there's no shame on deliberately working to counter it. And in fact, if we can embed structures in the way that we interact with patients and clients, if we can embed structures in the way that the physical environment is set up in medical settings, then we can help counteract these implicit biases to ensure that we are making appropriate and the best healthcare decisions for the individual standing in front of us, that we don't see an individual like my mom as a representative of a group of people. We see her as an individual, and we see her as human as we are, even if she looks different than we
Oh
do.
my gosh, so much information. And I love how you put the science behind it, because that's where we need to start. You know, there's
Yes,
so many emotions and fueling. And I love how you brought the science to it. And we can start from a common ground of, yes, this is how our brains are wired. This
yes,
is how we work, and we understand with the awareness. And you were talking about, you know, even marginalized groups being prejudiced. I call
yes,
myself out all the time, you know,
yes,
as we're talking about the power of the only, and I speak up for women, and I speak up for Asian women, all people of color. I speak up for
yes,
men as well. But we
yes,
all need to recognize when we need to call ourselves out because of
100%.
however we were raised. And we have several episodes where we talk about the stereotypes, right? Different stereotypes that we have about ourselves, even because
Yes,
even stereotypes can hold back ourselves. So thank you for giving us that scientific perspective, and we'll check out that study for people who are interested more. But then evolving the conversation into, if we can start from that place, and in healthcare, you've seen the impact and you know the threat of it personally, and now you're creating that change. But also we can apply this to all the systems, right? Because I
exactly.
go into organizations and we have diversity talks sometimes as a keynote
Yes,
speaker, and for years, you know, the power of the only is great. Yes, it's about empowering yourself. How do we own our voice, how in our power, how do we speak up in a way that we want to be heard? But at some point, like I said last year in my keynotes, it's not about leaning in or stepping up anymore. What happens when we are, but there may be things in the environment or the system that may, and the culture that may also need to shift. And that conversation has always been there, but it hasn't cracked open until now, right?
yes,
And I love that you're bringing the research to that. And it's something that you've been talking about for since you've been working, right? Your ages. But
yes,
now other people are going, oh, you mean the systems and the structures can shift too, not just the individuals.
yes, 100%. And in fact, when we as individuals believe that it's all up to us to make it better, it can actually harm us.
Mm,
Because what we know from the research is that you can, as a person with a marginalized identity, think if I could just work harder, if I could just work smarter, I could overcome all of the structural obstacles being put in front of me, or you might just call them obstacles. And yet, it doesn't matter how hard or fast or smart you work, if the structures put the obstacles in front of you and will not give you any ability to move them, you are stuck. And so there you are, believing that it's something that you could have done better. And that's very harmful, not only to self-esteem, but also to mental health and physical health and longevity. And this is not something that people are imagining. This is something
mm.
that we can document with the scientific method, and we can demonstrate and have demonstrated with the scientific method. So it's very important for people to understand. We have this belief in American society, and we both live in America, Angela and
Yeah.
I, that if you just work harder and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, then you can have everything that everybody else has, or that the people in positions of power have. And to some degree, that is true. And I am super optimistic, and I am one of those people who's worked
Yeah.
harder and longer than everybody else
Yes.
in order to be where I am, right? And yet, when the systems and the structures are immovable, there's only so much you can do, and people need to understand that. And that's what we're seeing protest about in the world right now, that the systems and the structures are not even giving people a fair and particularly Black people and
Yeah.
African American people a fair chance. And this is happening in the police and criminal justice system. This is happening in the educational system. This is happening in housing. And of course, this is happening in the healthcare system. It's including infertility care.
Yeah.
And we know that Black women are more likely to suffer from fertility challenges because of the accumulation of the social and other kinds of stressors that they face over the course of their lives, from trimester before they're even conceived to the in utero period to early childhood, throughout adulthood, throughout the lifespan. And yet they're Black and African American women are much less likely to be able to access and to receive fertility treatment and fertility care. So this is one small example of what's happening in the larger medical care system and what's happening in society in general, in all of the important systems in our society. And we have to know that. So we want to step into our full power and self-authority as individuals and lift each other up to help each other do that with information and resources and love and support, all the things that we do at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute. We are your village from trimester throughout your mommy life cycle and your parenting life cycle. So once you're pregnant, we're not like, okay, bye, good luck. Then we have Super Baby Pregnancy and Parenting Program. Then we have Baby Proofed Ambition for when your baby's here and you're trying to figure out how you're going to manage work and your business and life and taking care of your baby and being the mom you want to be at every stage. So we want to help and support people in stepping into their full power and self-authority. And yet we have to understand that as people are rising, if the systems are, if that glass ceiling is pushing them down, then there's only so far that they can rise. And that's really, really important for people to recognize. This is not imagined, this is real.
But that's why I also wanted, and I love that perspective that you brought to it, but also, like we were saying, and that's why I called you the power of the only, because I believe it's twofold. And like you were saying, it's not like just because the structures are that way that we don't do the other things, right? To own our voice and own our power. But yet when you hit that ceiling, not to get discouraged, but just to understand sometimes the factors that are in, because I don't want people to get discouraged, right? Because like you said, you are the power of the only because you pushed ahead despite the odds, despite everything that was in stats. And for me, I didn't actually ever feel like I struggled. I just felt like that's what I had to do. And maybe looking back, it was a more of a struggle in certain aspects. But for me, that's what I want to find the power in, right? The power of the only. It's like admitting to ourselves, if those structures exist, which they do, how are you going to harness the power of your only to own your voice and your power, to speak up and to do it anyway? But yet, like you're saying, to protect your mental health, to know when not to internalize everything so it even defeats you more. Or if you take on that stereotype of just because I'm of a certain race, ethnicity, or gender, that I can't do it. And so that's where I want to come from, the empowerment angle, but yet not denying that there are other structural things that need to shift. Because I have clients that ask me all the time, I go, but that doesn't mean we need to step back. Talk about your experience, because you said that, because you are the one that, even though you said there's these structural things and you need to realize that we can't hit those glass, we hit those glass ceilings, and not to take it too personally, but you broke it.
Yes.
And so did I. So
and I believe
how do we harness that?
Possible for every single one of us to do that. It helps a lot when we have structures that give us a fair chance. We're not asking for an advantage. We're asking for a fair chance, right? So that's number one. But number two, I will say that two of the most important things that I learned along the way that I think made all the difference for me. The first thing is that I learned that the things that people say are and are not possible for you are only true if you believe them. And so there were a lot of people who said that there were a lot of things that would never be possible for someone like me. And I did not believe them. And because I did not believe them, I did not give up. I did not stop. I kept going. I kept my eye on the goal, and they were wrong. So that's number one. That's where your power and your full self-authority can come in for you and really power you. That is the power of the only. And the other thing is that when we're working within structures that maybe aren't set up for success for people like us, there is a tendency to either completely resist the structure or to totally blend into the structure to make it work. And what I will say is that neither of those approaches is correct.
Yes.
We have to be able to work within the system enough to be able to succeed there. But beyond that, the power of the only is being who we are, not being afraid to stand up and use our voice, not feeling like we have to look like everybody else, think like everybody else, do what everybody else says. I remember when I started graduate school at UCLA in the psychology department, my PhD is in health and social psychology with a concentration in statistics or quantitative psychology. And I showed up with this hair that I have. And if you're listening and not watching, I have very big curly hair. And I remember seeing an email that was printed out on a desk where I was getting some help from an administrative person that said that I had done something wrong, like I'd made some sort of mistake with paperwork, and said, she's a little free-spirited, if you know what I mean. And I saw it, and she didn't realize I saw it, but it was sitting right in front of me. And I remember thinking, she thinks I'm free-spirited just because of the way I look, just because of my hair. She doesn't even know me yet. We just met. And
you don't fit a mold of what they want. Yeah, what they assume it's supposed to be. Yes.
Yeah, a future scientist, a future psychologist is going to look like, a future professor is going to look like. And that is just one silly and small example of so many instances like that. And I could have taken that cue or any one of the million other cues and started blow drying my hair straight and trying to be more like everybody else who was around me. But I refused to be, and I refuse to be anything other than who I am. And because of that, I am able to be powerful in my own way that is not already represented there. And the other thing that's related to this is that I don't think like everyone else does either.
Yes.
And let me tell you what an asset that has been, because I have created new areas of scientific inquiry. I have created new theories. I have created new models of lifespan and human development. I have created new protocols for fertility and pregnancy that didn't exist before. And the areas of work and research that I have created are very systems oriented, because I have a brain that sees the connections among things in life and areas of life and health and fertility that nobody has ever noticed before.
I love it. I love how you bring it all together.
And if I had continued to try to think, if I had tried to think like everybody else, or I had listened to my mentors who told me that this is the state of the knowledge and don't bring these innovative ideas, because before they're celebrated, they're criticized, remember? Yes. So if I had listened to that and gotten discouraged, there are hundreds of babies so far, and I think ultimately will be millions of babies who may not have ever arrived in this world. And that would have been a tragedy. And so I'm so thankful, and only I could have done that, because only I started my life from where I started. Only I had my life experience. Only I have my brain and my perspective. So that is so the power of the only.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that piece, because, we were talking about how the systems, right? The systems are not structured properly, but yes, it's still about your own empowerment and knowing at this moment, it may shift later, but in the meantime, what are we going to do? We're not going to say, oh, the system hasn't changed, I can't succeed, because then we start to believe those own stereotypes. So let's go a little deeper. What was the determining factor that allowed you to feel that way? I feel that way too. And that's why I started this podcast, The Power of the Only, because I want to interview women like you, different individuals, leaders, and show people that there's a process. We don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but there is something inside us that allowed us to say, you know what? I know the situation of what it's like, but I'm going to be the new voice. I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to be the bridge. What is that? That other people can harness, that you tapped into.
That's such a good question. And I just want to back up to something that you said right before you asked that question, which is that we actually have a vast scientific literature that shows that stereotypes in our society become internalized by individuals. And so that is real, what you referenced. When it comes to what was it that I tapped into, I think that it had two parts. One part is that I had tremendous faith in myself. I had tremendous faith. I had tremendous faith in myself. I had tremendous faith in the world around me and the goodness of the world around me and my belonging in the world, even when I literally didn't know where I belonged. And I mean, when you are a child without a mother, it's hard to feel like you belong anywhere. And yet I felt a strong sense of belonging. And the other part is that I couldn't not do it because I had this mission.
Yeah.
I had this why that wouldn't let me rest, that wouldn't let me stop, that wouldn't let me give up, even when I felt discouraged, even when it felt heavy, even when it felt hard, even when I was literally still struggling to survive and trying to put these pieces of information together. And my life was not even fully safe yet. I mean, to have that ability to focus in the middle of chaos, you just have to be so driven. And the only way you can be that driven is if you're so clear about and connected to your why.
Yes.
And that's really it. It's the why and the belief that enabled me to keep going. That's what I tapped into, and that's what other people can tap into too. So number one, if you doubt yourself, I want you to work on your belief in yourself and your belief that the world is good. And that can be hard when your experience has taught you otherwise, but there's a lot of good in the world if you look for it. So really tapping into your belief, and then really getting clear about what is your why and what are the things that you need to do to stay connected to that why every single day, so that even when you come up against obstacles, which you will, no matter who you are, you could have every advantage and privilege in the world and you'll still come up against obstacles. And if you're the only, then you'll probably come up against even more obstacles. But if you're powered by that why, you are really unstoppable.
I love all the insight that you share. We've tapped into so many different areas, and I hope that we can all bring it together in the sense that, as we continue to change and be a voice for change and bring up the other onlys and change the systems. But in the meantime, it really is up to us. Not saying that you don't face challenges, but it's up to us in our internally, the mindset shift of how, you can walk into the room, you glow. And from no one would ever even guess or imagine the background that you came from. And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to take our stories and use them in a way that enlighten others. And it's not always easy when we're going through them, but when we're through that journey, it's a way to contribute to others. So thank you for sharing those nuggets and knowledge with us. And what do you think your mom would say looking down now on everything you've created?
Oh God, it's going to make me cry, Angela.
Oh, you just are so amazing.
Thank you. Yesterday, I did a share with a former client who did our fertility epigenetic tailoring, which is this very powerful personalization that we can do of the trimester protocol for people based on their genome.
Yeah.
And to create even more powerful epigenetic change. And she just said that you basically, like, I changed her whole life. And I looked at her and I said, you know, when I listen to you, there's purpose in all of it. You know, I feel like everything that I experienced, losing my mom, spending what we calculated like almost 79,000 hours that I dedicated to developing the Primester Protocol over the past 24 years, really missing out on a lot of life while I was doing that in my 20s and 30s, even when most people are out doing other things, right? All of that feels so worthwhile to me. And so I wish my mom were still here, and I know I would give it all away to have her here. And yet I hope that she feels like, you know, I took these circumstances and, you know, I made the most beautiful thing out of them that I could have possibly made. And, you know, my husband, we do these live couples Q&As, and somebody asked us a question about what if people think that it's a disservice or it's selfish to bring children into this world, which is so messy and has so many problems. And my husband said, unless you're the one who has the child who like changes the world, like my wife.
Oh
And I
my
was
gosh.
like, you know, so I think,
You're going to make me cry.
yeah, it makes me cry too. So you would never wish these circumstances on anyone, but I really hope and believe that my young mother would think that her legacy has been so amazing. And she has a total of 4 children, and we're all making important contributions to the world. And so I hope that she feels really proud of that, and I feel really proud of her and her courage.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cleopatra, for sharing your heart, your wisdom, your insight. And I know that this is what I want to harness in people, the power of the only. It starts with you as the individual, owning your power and your voice, taking a stand for things, showing up the way that people can hear you, right? And then bringing others only up with you to create an impact, but also people who may not necessarily feel like the onlys. We can all learn from these conversations, right? What can people learn from the power of the onlys in order to create new innovation, new diversity, new thought? And that is the moment in time we are at right now. And I feel like you spreading this information will help either tap into the individual may feel like they're the only, and for others listening may spark something, and that we all can create this change together. So thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your work highlighting these voices and highlighting the power of the only, because it is really an asset in so many ways if we're willing to believe in ourselves and really go for it.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
You too. Thank you.